Welcome to Your Future Starts Now, the go-to podcast for extraordinary women who are ready to step into their next chapter with authentic confidence. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua, empowerment coach, motivational speaker, children's book author, and girl mom. Whether you're a corporate powerhouse or an entrepreneur, this show is designed for you. Your Future Starts Now is more than just a podcast. It's a movement towards rewriting the rules of success for high-achieving women. Are you ready to get unstuck and step into your next chapter? If so, you're exactly where you need to be. Your future starts now. Welcome to Your Future Starts Now. I'm your host, Gia Lacqua. Thanks for joining us. Today, I am so excited to welcome Mal Wrenn Corbin to the show. Mal was born in Worcester, Massachusetts, and after a turbulent childhood, went on to be a first-generation college graduate of Dartmouth College. After receiving her Bachelor of Arts degree at Dartmouth, she went on to earn her Master's of Education at Boston College. Today, Mal works as a business development professional for a leading financial services firm. She's also the author of Wrenns, a memoir that provides a unique perspective on overcoming adversity and escaping the cycle of poverty, addiction, and violence. Mal, welcome to the show. So excited to chat with you today.
Thank you so much, Gia. I'm really excited to be here with you today as well.
So we have a lot to talk about. I feel like
there's a lot there to
there's
unpack.
a lot there. So we'll just jump right in. Tell us a little bit about your backstory and what inspired you to write Raising Wrenns.
Yeah, so I know you provided some summary there around the story, but in short, growing up in Worcester, which is much like a lot of old factory towns across this country. And I know there are a lot of people who can relate to a lot of aspects of my story. But in that post-factory town setting, there were a lot of challenges, poverty, addiction issues, homelessness, violence. And our family was no stranger to those issues. We were dealing and grappling with those same challenges. And, so you of course end up with a lot of trauma that you're taking with you throughout your life. But in short, this is a story about overcoming and powering through all of those challenges to ultimately build a life for myself, a quote unquote successful life. And we can dig into really what that means and what that looks like. But in short, it's that, frankly, if I can be so bold to say, this grubby little welfare kid who ultimately made her way to now working for or building a really successful career, working for a large Fortune 500 financial services company.
Such a beautiful story, Mal. I mean, talk about resilience and strength and post-traumatic growth, right? Which we can also get into.
Yes, for sure.
For sure. So what are you hoping that readers will take away from your memoir?
Well, one thing that I've been really surprised about since launching this book earlier this year is, as I mentioned, there are a lot of people out there that have faced similar challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something we should talk a little bit more about, because I think one of the things I faced in my adult life, even in college, but certainly in my professional career, is feeling a bit like an outsider. Like I'm so different because of this way that I've grown up and the traumas that I've had to navigate. And really that feeling of being an outsider, but learning ultimately through this book launch process, frankly, that there are a lot of me's out there.
Mm-hmm.
And their stories might not look exactly like mine, but there's a lot of people who can relate. And so there's so much beauty in knowing that people are finding comfort in being able to relate to somebody else and their experiences, and frankly, pulling the veil of shame, if you will, off of that picture of trauma and what a successful woman looks like. So I've been excited to be living some of that through this book launch.
So incredibly powerful. And I just want to personally thank you for being bold enough to share your story and brave enough to share your story, right? To help other people who, as you said, who faced similar journeys and really as high achieving women, I think a lot of times we tend to mask the dark sides, right? That we don't want people to see. We tend to hide the traumas or the, challenging situations that we have faced, when in reality, those challenging situations and traumas have forged us into the person that we are today, right?
Thank you for saying that. You just hit the nail right on the head and spot on for me. I mean, when you're out to a dinner with a client and you're surrounded by colleagues that we're all having conversations about, where you typically would summer or go on vacation, and, your life hasn't exactly fit that model, you're not inclined to just suddenly strike up a conversation about some really uncomfortable topics. But that does leave you feeling again like you're just trying to um, get in under the radar, blend in. And I do think, getting back to your earlier question, that's a big part of why I did want to write
Mhm.
this book and get my story out there, because I felt while I've wanted to blend in, I also had this deep need to be understood and known for who I truly am. And there's a lot to be proud of there, as you just alluded to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's such a powerful story. So I'm curious as to when we talk about childhood trauma, this is sort of an important question because I feel like for a lot of women, perhaps at the time, right, especially if we were much younger, we don't realize what's happened to us. So we may not consider it trauma, capital T or lowercase t, or maybe in our adolescence or as a young adult. At the time, we don't recognize it for what it is. So I'm curious, from your experience, did you sort of know all along that you were in this turbulent childhood, or at what point did it sort of become that aha moment for you?
Yeah, fascinating question. You're right. Really, especially as young children, we can be going through some really difficult times, and I detail some of those stories in my book. But in being so young, you don't necessarily know that something's not quote unquote normal. Um, and that's some of the beauty in being a child, right? For
Mhm.
sure. You can still have those innocent moments
Great point.
in all of the darkness, if you will. But certainly moments, as I was getting to be age 11 and 12, and even having small interactions with a teacher or someone from the Big Sister, Big Brother program, where they might say something like, gee, does your dad always talk like that? And that was a cue and a clue.
Mhm.
Okay, something's not right at home.
Mhm.
Or even in knowing that there were some significant traumas or things that were quote unquote wrong. And I'll just come out and say it. At this one point in time when I'm 12 years old, I'm living with a 47-year-old man. And there's an inappropriate, you can't even really call it a relationship, but there's inappropriate behavior happening
Mhm.
there in that setting. But I wanted to protect the situation. So I knew it was wrong, and I don't know if I would have labeled it as trauma at that point in my life, but knew it was wrong, but also felt like it was, number one, a better situation perhaps than what was back at home for me,
Mhm.
quote unquote home. Uh, but also just this, in your immature brain, thinking that you might be actually in a relationship with a person, which clearly you're not. Uh, and then to add to that, Gia, as part of this process for getting this book down on paper, there was an investigative element to it. And so in that situation that I just told you a bit about, I was 12 and 13 years old, certainly old enough to remember the stories, but I never thought of myself as uh, maybe somebody who suppressed memories. And of course, um, that's normal to expect that from someone who has suffered significant trauma. But as part of that investigative work, requesting reports from the Department of Youth and Family Services
Mhm.
that wrote down or detailed the facts, the unbiased story of what was playing out from a third party, it became clear I was suppressing memories. And that was so startling to me. So I know you asked a seemingly simple question or straightforward question, but there are so many layers to it there. And, how much awareness you have, really, regardless of your age.
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I mean, I think you're right. I think it is a multifaceted answer, right, to a complicated question. And the suppressing of memories is our way of coping and protecting ourselves when we're overwhelmed, right? And then the other piece of it is we're doing the best we can and making the best of the situation and the circumstances that we are in. And even though the situation might not be ideal, it's it's what we're doing again to protect ourselves.
That's right. That's so true.
Right. And so it may not be until much later that we realize, well, maybe that wasn't appropriate, or maybe that wasn't quote unquote normal, or, maybe that was traumatic for me. And so I do think it takes a lot of time and introspection and reflection. And it's incredible what you said also about the police reports and, the investigation that you did into looking at the objective facts. And that must have been, I mean, that I can't even imagine how to describe what you must have experienced, but to sort of read about your own life through the lens of somebody else.
Surprisingly, I just did not expect that to
Sure.
be as difficult as it was. I think it's always difficult when you revisit tough memories and traumatic histories and events, for sure. But there was something unique about seeing an independent, objective outsider detail what they were seeing
Yeah.
as compared to your own memories. That that was surprisingly hard, yeah,
Oh,
to navigate.
incredible, incredible. And so as you, finished your education and you sort of started in, your professional journey, I'm curious as to how your childhood trauma manifested in your life. How did it show up? How did it surface for you as an adult?
Yes, I would say the overarching and big theme here for me has been the sense of belonging.
Yeah.
Do I actually deserve to be here? Have I truly earned it? Do they know I always revert back to that, the grubby little welfare kid. And so I would say it's not been a single event to overcome that. So it's interesting. I mean, I was lucky enough. I'm going to actually correct that statement. I had earned my right to make it to Dartmouth College, an
Mhm.
Ivy League college. So not to only be the first in my family to go to college, but to make it to Dartmouth, no less. And then again to build this career for myself in, frankly, a historically very male dominated, very conservative, tough industry. And again, that desire to want to fly under the radar and blend in both of those circles, but really challenging myself to recognize that I have just as much of a right to be here and have a seat at this table as anyone else here. And that's an ongoing conversation with myself for sure. It's not
Mhm.
as though had a sudden realization, okay, yes, I deserve to be here. It can require daily reminders and positive self talk. to, to keep reminding myself of that.
Sure. It's a constant battle, right?
For sure.
Yeah. And you and I had previously chatted about imposter syndrome. And, I love this concept of belonging because it is a very basic human need that we all have, right? The desire to belong and be included. And so it is interesting when you're holding on to these old memories and traumas and stories about who you were, and how that feeds into your identity as an adult. So first, I would love to touch upon imposter syndrome. Obviously, we talk about it a lot as it applies to women in the corporate workplace, and of course, yes, we know at the basic level, it's where we doubt our accomplishments and we have this fear of being exposed as a fraud, right? Despite our accomplishments. But you and I touched upon something that I think is often overlooked and really important, which is I think there's a subpopulation of women who for them, imposter syndrome is something much deeper. And I think it's exactly what you just hit on, which is when you've experienced trauma, it deeply affects the way you see yourself. And I think that brings imposter syndrome to a whole nother level of, relating to your self-worth. So I would love your take on that.
Yes. And admittedly, I really have only my own experience to compare it to, but as I reflect on my own experiences, I would say reinvention has been really important for me. And I think it can be a really powerful tool. It was really powerful. Um, I'll give an example. At this point in my life, when I'm now 14 years old, and I'm living with a boyfriend at the time, older. He's an adult, but certainly not the same situation I had been in previously, and his brothers, and it just was not a good situation. And at this point in my life, really no members of my family are around. For the first time in my life, truly, I am on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And it was upon me to take my life into my own hands. And I just recall walking to school. I'm a freshman in high school. I'm walking to school this day, and I have this realization that I have to change my life. Like, I have to do that. So this isn't relying on parents or others in my family. And that was an important moment in changing the direction for me. But where I'm going with that is I ultimately was able to then, navigate some other tough circumstances, foster care and brief homelessness. But I eventually made myself out of Worcester and am now in a suburban high school system. And now I've gone from having this goth haircut and really kind of dirty, scrappy clothes. And now I'm wearing Argyle sweaters and a preppy haircut. And that was part of this transformation and this identity shift.
Mm-hmm.
I need to now project something maybe that I want to be. I might not have felt that it's who I was truly inside, but directionally who I perhaps wanted to become or be. And so I've had iterations of that throughout my, adolescent and adult life. And that's been important for, I'll admit, for creating buy-in and enabling people to see you in different roles or in different environments. But to your point, you find yourself in these situations where now you really feel like you're presenting yourself as something other than you maybe truly feel you are inside. And I guess what I've had to do is challenge my thinking around that. I mean, who am I to even say deep down inside, I'm the grubby little welfare kid? We are all who we decide we want to be and who we
Mhm.
want to become. And that's the beauty of life, right? We have that power to be whomever we would like and want to be. Um, yeah, and just ultimately reconciling the two, right? So creating this person that you want to be, but also owning that history and in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. That's incredible. I mean, and at 14, I mean, yeah, of course, we all go through our own identity shifts when we're in our teenage years, but not many of us have had to take that, walk to school and think, wow, I really have to take ownership of my life, right? And where it goes from here. And so it sounds like that was a really pivotal moment and a very tender young age.
It sure was,
Yeah.
for sure.
So the reinvention is a great topic, and I love what you said about the Argyle sweaters and right, like stepping into the person you want to be, or that the saying, "Dress for the job that you want," right?
For sure.
And so I think I agree with you, but I think that is a really hard shift for people, and in some instances, like as we grow and evolve, it's maybe a shift here, a tweak there. But there are times where you almost have to sort of step out of who you were and step into a completely new identity in order to really evolve into the person you want to be. And that can be very scary for people, right? I know a lot of it comes down to the external perception and what will people say and what will people think. So I would love to know from your experience how, over the course of your life, not just at 14, but what has been your experience with reinvention and identity shifts and personal transformation? How did you overcome some of those hurdles and challenges?
A couple of things come to mind. Uh, Number one, I would say realizing that how important it was to project confidence and I'm not trying to sell the whole phrase fake it until you make it, but it is really important to project that confidence so that you can get some initial buy-in. Now certainly it's on us to make sure we get comfortable and get comfortable with what we're talking about, where we're working, and the work that we're doing for sure. But I realized that pretty early on in my career that I had to project that. And that was not my North Star, I would say. I think by nature, to your point, when you live through trauma like that, you feel pretty small. You feel like my body language just wants to change. My shoulders want to come in. My voice gets smaller. I want to defer to others. And I assume that others have a perspective that is going to be more important than mine. And I think as I started to move through my career, just recognizing the importance of confidence, and even if I wasn't entirely 100% feeling it and believing it in myself, that I had to project it as a starting point. But also I started to see people around me in my professional workplace that maybe we started at the same level, and I felt that we had comparable expertise, or I even had greater expertise and greater knowledge than this other individual or individuals, yet they were starting to progress in their careers.
Mm.
And that was a light bulb moment for me. It was like, wait a minute, I have a lot to offer here, and I'm worthy of making these progressions through my career like these other people. And I couldn't just maybe sit around and wait for somebody to tap me on the shoulder. I had to become brave and articulate what I wanted and why I felt I deserved it. And so those, I think, have been a really important part of just having awareness around those self-worth challenges, and that I've got to be really cognizant of it, and making some concerted effort and decisions to take things into my own hands, much like I was 14 and on that way to school that day, taking charge of it.
Absolutely. And I love what you said about it's almost like trying on confidence, right? It's almost like we have to try on different personas or, it's like when you go to find a dress, find the one that fits you and makes you feel good. So it's like we sort of have to try on these different personas until we find the one that feels comfortable, right?
I love that. I love that. Right. And I think we're well within our rights to do that. I think our gut reaction is to maybe feel that that's phony. But again, who is it that says right out of the gate, no, that you're supposed to be this other person that you just were growing up to be because others around you defined you that way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what you said is so incredibly important because in the work that I do, I talk about the worth wound, which is the concept of, we believe who we have been told we are. Right. And it's not who we are that holds us back. It's who we've been told we are. And so it's breaking free from those labels that are so deeply ingrained in our identity.
I love that. That is so spot on.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of introspection and reflection, but those labels stick with us and through, into adulthood. And sometimes we don't even realize it, and it becomes just part of our identity. And we think that we can't shed those old labels or those old identities when in fact to your point, we have the agency and the power to do that.
That's true. For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. So, I want to talk about this concept of post-traumatic growth a little bit, which is, this phenomenon that positive changes can occur in people who have experienced adversity and trauma. And it's that period where it leads to increased resilience and essentially a deeper sense of meaning in life. And I know a lot of other people who have been brave and vulnerable in sharing their stories. You're helping people. And it's also part of that healing process of like, how can I create more meaning out of my experiences? And I think that is incredibly powerful. So I would love to know what your experience with post-traumatic growth has been and how you would describe it, and sort of what separates the people who are able to evolve.
That's an interesting question. One of the things that I've always taken with me, albeit through times where, again, I might have been feeling smaller and unsure of myself, unconvinced that I belonged somewhere, that I had made it to, was also still this ability to feel proud of what comes to mind was adaptability. I mean, I had moved 15 times by the time I was 15, all between apartment buildings, all within like a 2 square mile neighborhood.
Wow.
Eviction after eviction and homelessness and 3 different high schools and, on and on and on. And I somehow was able to adapt and still be able to go on and ultimately have a successful high school, college career, if you will. And that was in large part due to being adaptable. And I've just talk about labels. Like I grabbed that for myself and something to feel proud of. And it certainly has served me well throughout my professional career, be it a career pivot, your role adjusts on a dime, circumstances at the organization shift, certainly times when a role is eliminated and there are layoffs. So being adaptable has been a call out. And you're right, that deeper meaning and that perspective that everything I've faced long ago is so much deeper and harder and more challenging than just about anything I'm going to face in the workplace today. And so having that perspective behind me is really helpful in just keeping some balanced perspective around, anything you might be navigating in your professional life, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's an incredible mindset shift, right? Because where we started this conversation, you were talking about, looking at your childhood and your past experiences as sort of holding you back because of the way you saw yourself and you view your self-worth. Now I hear you talking about how it's a source of strength.
100%. 100%. I think that is so important.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Incredible. So incredible. Mal, I would love to know. So, in this podcast, we talk about success and redefining success. So, I would love to know how you define success for yourself and how has that definition evolved for you over time?
Yes. If I'm being completely transparent, as I was navigating that early life and working through all of that trauma, I had my heart set on number one, getting to college. In my mind, that was the door opener to a successful life.
Sure.
And all things Worcester and anything tied to it was in the rear view mirror. That was my mechanism for surviving and creating this picture of success. Now, for all intents and purposes, was able to do that. Go to college, build a really great career for myself over the years. And also, having all of the things that look like success. I have a home. I have a nice family. And all of that is super important. But I think actually that what I didn't even realize until I started working through this book was something we touched on a little bit earlier. And that is owning that history. So actually revisiting all things Worcester and everything that's tied to it and finding a way to feel proud of it. Even in my parents, who we haven't talked much about that. I would say that they were not terrible people, but they made terrible, terrible decisions. And so even in them, I can find beauty and seeing that they have some traits that I now can see in myself, which not all that long ago, I would have cringed at the thought of that. But now I can really see some beauty and there are some positive characteristics there. And I think I've been lucky to inherit those. So I guess that's the long way to answer your question. Success is really, I think about building, creating, and living a life that you can feel proud of and feel proud of yourself in. And so that picture may look different for everyone. But if you're living a happy, healthy life that makes you feel good and proud of who you are, that I think is the definition of success for me.
That's beautiful. And I love what you said about, sort of facing those suppressed memories and experiencing, what you've experienced in order to heal and grow and evolve and to be successful in your own life. Because I think so often we try to suppress and ignore and deny, and it only comes back to bite us, right?
That's for sure. Yes,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
does.
it's a great point. So, Mal, what would you say to our listeners who, what's one thing you want our listeners to consider doing differently or changing, especially for those who might be grappling with their own childhood traumas? Any advice that you want to leave them with?
Two things come to mind. I would say, one thing we talked a little bit about before is that constant reminder that you are worthy. You are just as worthy of being at that table as anybody else is here. And the second I would say is maybe more of a tip, but one thing that I have found helpful is particularly if you've grown up with trauma like I have, when you think about yourself and are you deserving, you're questioning yourself, think about your childhood self or even any other child at those ages where those things were happening to you. Take yourself out of your body a bit. And when you look at that little girl and you see all that she's been through, would you ever say she's not deserving of sitting at that table? Of course you wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So take yourself out of it and think about another child or another human being who's lived through what you've lived. And I think you'd have a lot more grace and love toward that being. And you're worth showing that to yourself.
Incredible advice. You do. Yeah, I think that's right. We have more empathy, compassion, like you said, grace and love for others, right, than we do for ourselves. So that's really powerful advice. Mal, where can our listeners learn more about you and purchase your book?
Thank you, Gia. Yes. And if interested, anybody can learn more through my website at malwrenncorbin.com. And the book is available through Amazon and any other large online platform, but just search for Raising Wrenns, WRENNS. And appreciate the conversation, Gia. It's been very nice. Thank you.
Mel, thank you so much for being here, for sharing your story and, your insights. This has been such an incredible conversation. So thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, you can visit my website at gialacqua.com, reach out on Instagram at gialacqua. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. This is Gia signing off with gratitude for your time and energy. Our mic drops, but the movement continues. Until next time, your next chapter is waiting. Take care.
That concludes another empowering episode of Your Future Starts Now. Before we wrap up, I want to thank this incredible community of high-achieving women. Your energy, resilience, and commitment to growth are the driving force behind what we do. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate it, leave a review, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Your feedback fuels our mission to empower high-achieving women just like you. And of course, share Your Future Starts Now with the extraordinary women in your life who are also on a journey of healing and empowerment. Connect with us on social media, share your thoughts, let us know what topics you'd like to explore in future episodes. Stay connected on Instagram at gialacqua. I encourage you to carry the energy of this conversation into your day and keep on supporting the incredible women around you. Until next time, remember, your next chapter is waiting.